think you have to look at the distress of the seller. So, 2019 was a pretty normal market. So back then there was 2 to 3% of distressed sellers. Right now we're at 2%. So the media headlines of, they're going up so fast, et cetera, we're at 2%. So that is the low end of a normal market of the distressed sellers. In 2008, it was 30%. 30% of sellers were distressed. And that is what created the crash, right? Because when you have distressed sellers aren't just going to sell to sell. Like I have a lot of sellers right now that have their properties listed, and if they don't sell it for what they want, they're just not going to move. I mean, there's so many people like that, right? Where they're just sitting, or maybe they're willing to give a little bit, but they're not, if you tell them, oh, you have to sell this property for 25% less to sell it, like they're just not going to sell it. Like, it doesn't make any sense for most people to sell it.
But I also think a component of distress is no money. Mm-hmm. I mean, people forget about this. These folks are sitting on equity.
Yeah.
So, let's say they're in some kind of financial distress and they can't pay their mortgage. Oh, okay, because that absolutely positively could be happening and probably is in many cases, unfortunately. But the fact that they can reach into their piggy bank of equity sitting in their home means it's not going to show up as a foreclosure. It's not going to show up, as going back to the bank, because there's a tremendous amount of equity in there to cover they're not underwater. Underwater means that the home is worth less than the loan. Mm-hmm. That's what that means. And this is not the case. Now, if you do look at foreclosures and defaults, it's still like 2.1%. It's really, really low. I mean, there will always be defaults and foreclosures. 1,000%, it will always just be. So, but it's really, really quite low. So, we're not anywhere near a problem. There was an interesting article that came out and measured 100 cities in 2025. 100. 22 had price reductions and 78 had price increases. Okay? Mm-hmm. So, trust me, in 2008, that was not going on. We did not have price increases in 3/4 of the cities in the United States. So, you got to be careful when you're watching these videos because, and it very well could be, there are markets that are in real big trouble, like Austin, Texas is in trouble. Tampa, Florida is in trouble. Some of these markets have corrected a lot, 5-10% already, and even more, depending on, but those are, even in 2008, what happened was there were certain markets that corrected 20, 30, 40%, and there were others that corrected 50%. Why would one correct 50% and one correct 30%? Well, it's because the bubble went higher there. Phoenix was one of those. Las Vegas was one of those. So, when you had sometimes you have this run up, and everybody jumps on. Well, it makes a correction harder in that particular market. You're not going to see these kinds of corrections in Midwest. You're just not. You're not going to see them in markets that never had a really, really significant price run up. So is there a pullback in some markets? Of course. But the overwhelming majority of home prices are going up in this country.
Yeah, and I want to discuss rates because everyone's hyper-focused on rates. And I do think rates, since they started dropping rates in September, we have seen an increase in homebuyer activity. I think it's more of a sentiment than anything else that, rates are falling. However, rates have very little to do with home affordability because right now we're higher than we have been, the last 10 years, but we're not really that high historically. And if rates were to come down a whole percentage point on a $500,000 house, that's only going to save you about $250 a month. So this isn't like if rates come down, all of a sudden everything's super, super affordable, because I personally don't see rates going back down to 3%. So if we get an extra 1% down to 5%, I'd say that would be good, but it's only going to save you about $250 on every, $400,000 borrowed.
Yeah. And so no matter, I guess the strategy moving forward is if rates continue to go down, what you're going to have is you're going to have a very, very slow, methodical, sales, you're going to have a little more sales. You're also going to have a little more refinances.